imagine, like, looking at a photograph of yourself maybe 50 years from now.
Right.
If you wear some everyday fashion trend, something wild or highly experimental, and you look back a year later and cringe, it really doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, you just delete the selfie from your phone and move on.
Exactly. The moment is totally temporary. But a wedding dress, that is, it's an entirely different beast. That is a high-wire act of permanence.
Oh, absolutely.
Because those photos are going to sit on mantles and, hang in hallways for half a century. So you are constantly hunting for this impossible, razor-thin balance. You want to look completely unique to your own personality, but you also desperately want to look timeless.
Yeah, and that's the trap, isn't it?
Right. And if you lean too far into history to find that uniqueness, suddenly you don't look timeless at all. You just look like you are wearing like a historical costume for a period piece movie.
It is a profound stylistic tightrope. I mean, you want garments with deep character, but you absolutely do not want to look like you're heading to a theater audition. And that anxiety, the fear of crossing that invisible line is what drives so much of the bridal industry today.
Which perfectly brings us to our core mission for today's deep dive. We are stepping directly into this really complex, high-stakes world of wedding styling to figure out how to navigate it without feeling completely paralyzed by all the options.
Yeah, and there are so many options right now.
So many. So to do this, we are pulling our insights straight from the article section of the Weddizer website. For those of you who might not be familiar, if you use the Weddizer website for fashion and styling purposes, you can find incredibly detailed guidance on how to deal with, niche wedding events.
Yeah, their article section is essentially a masterclass in curation.
It really is. And they recently released this comprehensive new guide, and it's titled Vintage-Inspired Bridal Styles Reimagined for 2026.
What stands out immediately in this Weddizer research is that they aren't just presenting like a catalog of dresses and wishing the reader luck.
Right, here are some pictures. Have fun.
Exactly. They are offering a highly specific styling roadmap. They tackle that exact tension you just introduced. How does a modern bride in 2026 actually blend deeply nostalgic, classic aesthetics with contemporary design?
Right.
Weddizer uses this specific phrase, timeless elegance meets modern romance, and their whole goal is to show how to achieve that without accidentally crossing into costume territory.
I always find that kind of magazine speak fascinating,
Yeah.
But we really need to break down what timeless elegance meets modern romance actually means in reality.
Yeah, what does that actually look like?
Right, so before we even examine the specific eras and silhouettes on the Weddizer site, we have to understand the psychology behind this shift. I mean, why are brides in 2026 suddenly looking backwards for inspiration?
Well, to understand the current trajectory, we have to look at the architectural foundation of what brides are actively rejecting right now.
Okay, interesting.
The Weddizer source material points out this definitive, massive shift away from the overly modern minimalism that has, completely dominated the last 5 to 10 years of bridal fashion.
Oh, you mean that era of the absolute blank canvas?
Yes.
Like the incredibly stark slip dresses, the completely slicked back hair, that unembellished, featureless aesthetic that felt almost like a sensory deprivation tank of fashion?
Precisely. For a long time, the ultimate goal was to look as sleek and unbothered as humanly possible.
Right, the cool girl aesthetic.
Exactly. But what Weddizer is tracking now is a deep, deep fatigue with that blank canvas. Brides are actively seeking meaningful, story-driven aesthetics. Modern minimalism, by its very definition, strips away narrative.
It leaves you with pure geometry.
Right. So the appeal of vintage inspiration lies in its inherent emotional weight. It is a way of standing out from standard modern trends, certainly, but it's also about finding a sense of timeless elegance and, establishing an actual emotional connection to the past.
They want the garment to feel rooted in something larger than just a passing Instagram aesthetic.
Exactly.
So it's almost like an architectural rebellion.
Yeah.
We stripped the house down to the bare studs for a decade, and now people are looking around saying, actually, I want crown molding. I want stained glass. I want something that feels like human hands made it.
That's a great analogy.
But the question remains, is this purely just a wave of nostalgia? Or is it a deliberate rejection of the highly curated, cookie-cutter modern wedding where, every Pinterest board looks totally identical.
The analysis strongly suggests it is a deliberate rebellion. I mean, the modern wedding industrial complex has become highly standardized. By reaching back into specific historical eras, a bride sort of reclaims her individuality.
It takes control of the story.
Right. It is a psychological choice to anchor herself in history, particularly in a world that feels increasingly fast-paced and disposable. Vintage aesthetics communicate longevity. They communicate survival.
Which perfectly sets up the visual side of this deep dive. Because if we are looking for a narrative, we have to look at how that actually translates into physical fabric, thread, and silhouette.
Right, the actual clothes.
Yeah. And the Weddizer lookbook essentially takes us on a time-traveling expedition through 3 very distinct eras. And the first one they highlight for 2026 is the one that, honestly, gave me the most pause.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Victorian elegance.
Ah, yes. The Victorian revival is a fascinating cornerstone of the 2026 styling guides. We are looking at a return to high necklines, long sleeves that extend past the wrist, and incredibly intricate, dense lace details that cover the arms and the décolletage.
Okay, here is where I have to throw up a massive red flag.
Go for it.
When I picture actual Victorian dresses, I picture a form of beautiful imprisonment.
You're not wrong.
Right. I think of heavy, stiff, completely unbreathable, woven fabrics. I picture rigid corsetry. How does a human being in 2026 actually survive a 12-hour wedding day? I mean, the ceremony, the photos, and the blazing sun, the dinner, the hours of dancing. How do you survive being trapped inside a Victorian silhouette?
That is the crucial mechanical problem, and solving it is where Weddizer's styling insights become incredibly valuable. Because the 2026 trend is categorically not about replicating a 19th century garment.
Okay, thank God.
Right.
Yeah.
It is about taking the visual geometry of the Victorian era and rebuilding it using 21st century textile engineering.
So we are keeping the visual drama, but completely overhauling the physics of the dress.
Exactly.
How do they actually achieve that, like practically?
It all comes down to material science. Designers are taking that modest, high-neck, long-sleeve silhouette, but instead of heavy cotton or stiff broadcloth, they are executing it entirely in lightweight organza.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which is a sheer, crisp fabric that floats rather than weighs you down. They are utilizing sheer mesh illusion fabrics to give the sleeves a much lighter, nearly invisible feel against the skin. But most importantly, they are incorporating stretch lace.
Wait, stretch lace?
Yes. By weaving elastane into traditional lace patterns, the fabric gains actual kinetic flexibility.
Wow, that fundamentally changes everything. If the lace stretches, you can actually lift your arms above your head to dance. You can breathe.
You completely regain your mobility. Furthermore, Weddizer points out that these modern interpretations feature subtle, strategic cutouts to provide modern edge and, actual ventilation.
So you don't pass out at the altar.
Exactly. And they are keeping the heavy embroidery localized and minimal, so you get the illusion of Victorian grandeur, but with the breathability and comfort of almost modern athletic wear construction.
That is a brilliant compromise. It's the Victorian aesthetic, but engineered for a modern woman's actual lifestyle.
Exactly.
So, moving along the Weddizer's timeline, we leave the restriction of the Victorian era and crash right into the ultimate rebellion, the 1920s. Flapper glamour.
The Roaring '20s aesthetic is positioned for a major resurgence. I mean, this is defined by high-impact kinetic bridal looks.
Yeah.
We're talking heavily beaded gowns, intricate fringe details that actively move when you walk, and the iconic drop-waist silhouette.
We should probably clarify what a drop waist actually does mechanically, because it can be an incredibly intimidating cut for a lot of people.
It really can be.
Because a traditional dress usually cinches at the narrowest part of the torso, but a drop waist completely bypasses your natural waistline and drops the seam all the way down to the hips.
Yeah.
It drastically elongates the torso.
That's a very specific look.
Right. But again, I have a practical question. If you have a dress covered top to bottom in glass beads and fringe, aren't you just wearing a beautiful suit of armor? Like, isn't it insanely heavy?
If it were genuinely made in the 1920s, yes, it would be incredibly heavy.
Right.
But similar to the Victorian updates, the 2026 reimagining relies heavily on modern construction. The inner structure of these gowns is vastly more streamlined today. Designers are using lightweight acrylic or hollow core beads instead of solid glass.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. They use durable but weightless mesh backing. The goal is to give you the visual drama of the fringe and the kinetic energy of the beads, but on a foundation that feels as light as a slip dress.
I mean, it makes complete sense. The entire point of the 1920s flapper era was mobility, right? The ability to move freely and dance to jazz without a corset.
Exactly.
So modernizing the weight of the dress actually honors the original spirit of the era way better than a historically accurate 60-pound beaded gown would.
That's a really great way to look at it.
And so, from the kinetic energy of the 20s, Weddizer takes us to the structured joy of the 1950s, the classic T-length dress.
Yes. The 1950s T-length is perhaps the most playful era highlighted in the entire guide. Structurally, it is defined by a very tailored, structured bodice that nips in at the waist, and then it explodes into a voluminous, soft tulle skirt.
Like a classic Dior silhouette.
Exactly. And critically, that hem is chopped off right at the mid-calf, deliberately exposing the ankles in the footwear.
Which means your shoe choice suddenly becomes a major structural component of the outfit, rather than just an afterthought hidden under a massive train.
Oh, footwear is crucial here.
But how are we preventing this from looking like a costume from the musical Grease? Because that's the immediate danger, right?
Yeah, that's the trap. But Weddizer highlights a phenomenal styling technique here that has nothing to do with the shape of the dress, but rather color theory.
No color theory.
Yeah, a stark, blinding white T-length dress can feel very literal. It feels overly retro. So the 2026 modernization happens by taking that exact 1950s silhouette and rendering it in contemporary muted color tones.
Like what?
Like soft blush, champagne, or even a really pale dove gray.
Wow, that is a fascinating psychological trick. By stripping away the traditional stark white, the brain just stops reading it as a vintage bridal costume and starts reading it simply as modern haute couture.
Exactly. It softens the retro vibe just enough to bring the garment firmly into the present day.
It demonstrates that the bride is in total control of the narrative, like playfully manipulating traditional bridal expectations.
Right. She's in on the joke.
Okay, so we have deeply explored the geometry and the textiles of the dresses themselves. But whether you choose a breathable Victorian high neck, a lightweight 1920s drop waist, or a champagne 1950s T-length skirt, the dress does not exist in a vacuum.
No, it certainly doesn't.
You cannot just put the garment on and consider the job done. The Weddizer articles emphasize that the styling roadmap requires us to frame these dresses properly. And that brings us to the next massive hurdle, accessorizing.
Yeah, accessories are the crucible where the entire look either solidifies into a masterpiece or shatters into a chaotic mess.
No pressure.
Right. But the Weddizer guidance points toward a strong resurgence in statement headpieces. We are seeing the return of the birdcage veil.
Oh, I love those. That's the dramatic structured netting that just skims across the eyes or the upper half of the face rather than draping down the back, right?
Yes, exactly. And they are also tracking trends toward pearl-studded headbands and antique-inspired tiaras.
And what about the jewelry or the styling of the hands?
Long satin gloves, specifically upper-length gloves that reach above the elbow, are making a very powerful return. And these are being paired with heavily heirloom-inspired jewelry. We are talking chunky pearl necklaces, geometric Art Deco earrings, and literal vintage brooches pinned directly to the bodices.
All right, this is exactly where my anxiety as a hypothetical bride just spikes.
I can imagine.
I mean, we have the vintage silhouette, the birdcage netting over the eyes, the opera-length satin gloves, the heavy Art Deco earrings.
Yeah.
We're sprinting headfirst back toward that costume tension we warned about in the very beginning.
It sounds like a lot.
If you pile all of this onto one human being, how do you prevent them from looking like a walking antique shop? This brings us to hair and makeup, which has to do a lot of heavy lifting to balance this out, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the Weddizer roadmap provides a highly specific formula for navigating this exact fear. Let's look at the hair first. The trend is deliberately leaning into historically accurate styling. Yeah, we are seeing soft, sculptural, retro Hollywood waves, highly constructed finger curls, and elegant chignons, which are those very smooth, controlled knots pinned low at the nape of the neck.
Okay, so the hair is firmly anchored in the past. It's committing to the bit.
It is. But the absolute magic, the mechanism that saves the entire ensemble from becoming a historical reenactment, happens with the makeup.
Okay, tell me.
The Weddizer strategy dictates taking a bold vintage influence, like a highly defined 1940s crimson red lip or a very sharp, dramatic winged eyeliner, and pairing it with incredibly fresh, ultra-natural, dewy, glowing skin.
Oh, wow. That makes perfect sense visually. It is like taking a classic black and white movie and remastering it in 4K high definition.
Yes, that's it.
You keep the timeless structural elements, the classic red lip, the sharp eyeliner, the architectural waves in the hair, but by contrasting it with that modern, sheer, glowing 2026 skin aesthetic, you provide a high-def upgrade. Because if a bride were to pair the vintage dress, the birdcage veil, the red lip, and a heavy, matte, powdered vintage foundation,
The look would instantly collapse under its own weight. I would read it as a literal period piece.